Whoa. Sorry, I've been teaching myself After Effects lately and I just couldn't help myself. Alrighty, you guys have been asking for it. It's finally here. This is Camera Basics Episode 1. You guys have been messaging me non-stop in the comment section on all sorts of videos saying you want to learn how to use your camera. Well, today we're going over the 3 fundamentals: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. This might be my most requested video of all time, so without further ado, let's get into it. So it wasn't all that long ago I was just like you, a young fledgling photographer, a brand new camera with manual settings, and no idea how to use it. So this is going to be part 1 of a series of mini tutorials to teach you the fundamentals of using a camera, the building blocks, the basis, what's going to build you up and make you a Jedi of photography and videography. Or something like that. Now, aside from a few jokes and maybe some creative intros, these videos are going to be fast, to the point, to get you the information you need to know to start your journey in any style of photography. We're talking portraits, landscapes, architecture, action, astrophotography, product photography. By the end of this series, you'll have the knowledge to pursue any style of photography that tickles your fancy. I know that when I was learning the basics to using a camera, there was nothing worse than googling something and finding a 20+ minute video on like how to hold your camera correctly. These videos are going to be nothing like that. I want these videos to be quick, to the point, but still informative, so you can learn a technique, go try it out, and then come back or rewatch it if you ever need a refresher course. But these videos should get you out shooting with your camera. So without further ado, let's talk about the 3 most important camera settings that are going to give you full creative control over the types of images your camera captures. Alright, so first up we've got aperture. Aperture is going to control how much light is let in by the lens on your camera. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky and a little bit counterintuitive, but the lower the aperture number, the more light you're going to be letting in, and the higher the aperture number, the less light you're going to be letting in. A good way to think of it is it's similar to pouring water out of a container. The smaller the opening, the slower the water is going to pour out, and the bigger the opening, the faster that water is going to pour out of that container. So remember, a small aperture number is going to mean a big opening, which means light is going to be collected faster, and vice versa. Lenses like this 50mm f1.8 go down to a really small aperture number, meaning they let in tons of light, making them great for low light shooting. Another key characteristic of aperture is the lower the aperture number, the less things are going to be in focus. This is referred to in photography and videography as a shallow depth of field. This is really popular for portrait photography if you want that blurry background. For the most part, most professional portrait photographers shoot at f2.8 or lower, although this can vary depending on the lens you're using and the look you're going for. On the other hand, if you're shooting landscapes, you're typically going to want more things in focus, shooting anywhere from f4 all the way up to f16. So check these out and see if you can spot the difference. This first one's going to be shot at f1.8, this next one's going to be shot at f7.1, and this last one's going to be shot at f16. Can you see the difference in the background? In summary, aperture plays a huge part in being creative with photography, allowing the photographer to choose what they want to emphasize and what they want to draw attention towards. Whew! That was a lot. Take a breather if you need it, go back and rewatch it if you're confused. Okay, now let's talk shutter speed. So shutter speed is a little bit simpler, I think. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Shutter speed is how long that shutter is open, exposing the sensor to light, allowing it to collect it and take an image. Lighting is so important when it comes to photography and videography, and mastering shutter speed is going to allow you to manipulate that light and create the types of images you want. Now, shutter speed can vary drastically. It can be as quick as 1/8,000th of a second on my particular camera, or as long as multiple minutes if that's what you need. Remember that the whole time that shutter is open, your camera is capturing light. If it's really dark, you might need something like 1/40th, 1/30th of a second. If it's really bright, you might be able to get away with 1/2000th of a second. The longer the shutter speed, the more light you're going to be able to collect, and the quicker that shutter speed, the less light you're going to be able to collect while the shutter is open. It's also important to keep in mind that if you're using a slower shutter speed like 1/40th of a second, you're going to have to keep your camera very still and everything you're taking a picture of very still, because any amount of motion is going to turn into blur when your shutter's open for that long. If you've ever taken a picture with your phone at night and noticed they're always blurry, it's because that phone is automatically switching to a long shutter speed to let more light in, But what happens then is any movement or shake from your hands gets caught and turned into a blurry image. If you ever find yourself using a long shutter speed like that, you're going to want to stabilize your camera with either a monopod, tripod, or just make sure it's laying on a flat surface. On the other hand, if it's really bright outside, you can get away with a fast shutter speed, 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, sometimes even faster. This is great because when you take that picture, the shutter's open for just the tiniest fraction of a second. It collects that light, it freezes the image. If you've ever seen like a jumping shot or just a sports photographer's action shot, they almost always shoot with a shutter speed around 1/1000th of a second to completely freeze that frame. Are we good so far? If so, we're gonna move on to our third and final setting, which is ISO. Now thankfully, if your head's starting to hurt a little bit, ISO is pretty straightforward. Put simply, ISO is just your camera's sensitivity to light. The lower the ISO, the darker the image, and the higher the ISO, the brighter the image. But here's the catch. ISO isn't actually letting any more light in. It's sort of like fake light. Generally speaking, you want to keep it as low as possible, but if you've already adjusted your aperture and shutter speed and are not willing to change them, you're going to have to compensate with ISO, either lowering or raising it to get a properly exposed image. When I'm taking shots in the middle of the day, it's real easy to keep that ISO at 100 by just cranking up the shutter speed. On the other hand, if it's nighttime, sometimes I need to boost that ISO as much as 6400 just to get a properly exposed image. Now it's important to keep in mind that every camera is going to have a different tolerance for how much you can crank that ISO. Higher end cameras, and especially the Sonys, you can crank that ISO over 10,000 and sometimes still get a clean image. On the other hand, with a cheaper budget DSLR, you might want to keep that ISO under 3200. So it really just depends on your camera and its sensor. That's another reason that phones still aren't very good at low light situations. They have very small sensors. If you've ever taken a picture with your phone and it comes out really noisy or grainy, noisy is the proper term, grainy is more the plain man's term, it's because phones have a tiny sensor that really can't get the ISO very high. I think on my Galaxy S7 it really only goes up to 800, whereas on this camera I think it goes up to like 16,000. As good as smartphones really are getting for photography these days, that's a big reason some consumers want DSLR or mirrorless cameras. They're just so much better in low light. Hopefully that made sense. Rewatch it if you need to, and once you've mastered these three things, you'll be well on your way to creating any type of photo you want. If you're feeling totally overwhelmed right now, don't worry, we've all been there. In fact, when I first used a DSLR, a lot of my pictures looked worse than when I took them with my smartphone because I was in charge of controlling all the settings. But trust me, once you've mastered them, you won't even have to think about it anymore, and you'll have so much more fun. If you are feeling overwhelmed or you just want to get a better understanding for each setting, see if your camera has a shutter or aperture priority mode. I think pretty much all cameras do. What these modes do is they allow you to just change one variable, either the aperture or the shutter speed, and the camera will automatically do the rest. So you can crank that shutter speed up, slow it down, see how it changes the image, and same with the aperture, and the camera will adjust all the other settings to make sure it's properly exposed. It's sort of like using training wheels. You're not quite ready to ride the bike all alone yet, but you don't need someone holding the back of the seat and running with you. If you're looking for a good middle ground on where to start with your settings, I'd recommend just shoot it like an aperture of 4, maybe a shutter speed of 1/160th, and then you can adjust those as needed. Anyways, hopefully this helps you out. As always, if you like the video, be sure to like it. If you have any questions, have any comments, hit up that comment section down below, and if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again for watching. My name's Winiarski. Check me out on Instagram, and I'll see you all in the next one.